For the interval, I've come out to the conservatory of the Royal Opera House, where in a moment I'll be joined by 3 of the creative team behind this new production. But first, when Ashton's Cinderella was premiered some 55 years ago, the Ugly Sisters were played by none other than Frederick Ashton himself and the legendary Australian dancer Robert Helpman. With their witty self-caricature and their immaculate comedy timing, they very nearly stole the show. So let's take a look at Ashton's particular contribution to the great British tradition of dancing on travesty, or as you and I would say, in drag.
I worked with Sir Frederick Ashton and Robert Helpman when I was a student. I played Napoleon, one of the suitors. They were looking for somebody very small, and they had somebody in the company that was going to do it, and Robert Helpman was walking down the corridor with Sir Fred, and Sir Fred pointed at me. I didn't know what was going on. Sir Fred pointed at me and said, "What about him?" And Robert Helpman went, "Far too tall." Helpman was very grand and, quite frankly, very acid in some of his ways of speaking, which actually came into in the role.
This is a little surreal, having been the prince and never ever thinking I would hit the Ugly Sister department.
Anthony had the athleticism and the beauty of the romantic prince. I was always his court jester in Cinderella. We were in several productions that Sir Fred choreographed.
We've been on stage many times, right through our careers. In fact, we used to wait in the wings a lot in these ballets together, and we used to say, well, one day maybe we'll end up at the end of a pier as a double act.
Anthony's dancing the role that Ashton created for his friend and rival, Robert Helpman, the bossy older sister, seen here on the right. That's Sir Fred as the meeker sister, on the left.
Fred's steps are actually very dainty, and they're very almost sort of 18th century. Helpman is much more the Spanish flamenco type. That's his extrovert quality. It's a daunting process. I mean, you've got Ashton and Helpman, who are legends in the roles, and we're trying to make it different, but at the same time, you have to be totally loyal to the choreography.
Right, are we ready?
Oh, yeah.
Here we go.
There's an affinity between us, but we don't ring each other or anything like that, but whenever we meet, it's just like where we left off before.
When you first start doing something, a lot of business happens. You put everything in. And in an opera house this size, if you become too mannered, it becomes a blur, because you're being seen from parts of the house as a small figure. So one learnt from the great artists, from those two and from Fontaine and everything, that it's economy, and so you've got to distill it into the telling moments.
Everybody is expecting me to do Helpman's role because I'm a very outspoken and extrovert person. And Anthony, who was very reserved and in a way shy, they expected us to reverse roles. But I think there's a bitch in Anthony and there's a reserved quality in me.
I find maybe a bit alarming, but I'm quite enjoying having a dominant streak and being a bit bossy and having a slightly darker side to the character.
Frederick Ashton appears to be the quintessential Englishman, but in fact he was born and brought up in South America. Yet the characters he choreographed for himself and helpmen drew on that very real and distinctly British tradition, the panto dame. Sir Fred, though, typically, claimed never to have seen a pantomime.
Oh, I say.
It's exactly 200 years ago that Cinders and her ugly sisters were first seen in this country in pantomime. Over the last 2 centuries, funny men have continued to dress up as funny women in an outrageous stage tradition of men in frocks.
There we are, Cinders.
Oh, thank you.
Give us a clap, boys and girls.
The ugly sisters are people. Whether they're men in frocks or women in frocks or whatever, they are people. They're sad, actually. They're very sad because they're ugly, and nobody wants to be ugly.
And positions and Wayne.
You have to make them look superficial on the surface, but underneath there is a sad dignity. We are in ballet, so it's not like men in frocks trying to be camp as women. It's about men in frocks, but also about the tradition of pantomime, but also it is a feminine thing because we are doing steps as women.
I had 2 wonderful aunts who lived together all their lives, where if a small argument or tiff, the younger one would always use the phrase, well, you're the eldest. When you're on stage, that's what you use in life as experiences and watching people, and they were such great ladies. No way as exaggerated as this, but there were little niggles and irritations.
Within the choreography, you have to be true to the text, almost like Shakespeare. This is how loyal you have to be to it. But there are moments where you can play on top of it with your brain, not within the steps, but the way you execute the steps. If it was that simple that it was just like a pantomime dame and a man in a frock, or it was a tranny where you were totally camp and over the top and tried to look and deceive people that you weren't a man, that's different.
And a 1. 8, 9, 10. 1.
We have to be a bit more female than that because of the steps, and we don't speak.
Yes, I think, one's
it's
thinking one is a woman character.
Yes.
It's not joke, here 2 fellas in frocks,
No.
although the audience will perceive it that way.
Now, the curtain's about to rise on the 2nd and 3rd acts of Cinderella, but before we head back into the theatre, I'm delighted to have been joined here in the conservatory of the Royal Opera House by the lady behind this new production, Wendy Ellis Somes, the production designer, Toer van Schayk, and the costume designer, Christine Haworth. Wendy is a former ballerina with the Royal Ballet and danced Cinderella herself, and her late husband, Michael Somes, was the prince in the original production. Wendy, Cinderella must be a very special role for you. It must be fantastic bringing it back to the stage, but why now? How has this come about?
Oh, that's a long story. Sir Anthony Dowell actually approached me before the Opera House closed.
So way back in the 90s?
Yes, he did. And then, as you know, when it closed, they went to the festival hall, and that wasn't the right venue for a new production. So we said, okay, let's wait until the house opens. And then this would be much better because all the new technology that they have backstage, larger stage space, all that combined, and so that is why we're doing it at this present time.
And how is it a new production? Because I think people watching at home might think, well, the steps are different. Is the choreography any different?
No, it's absolutely the same. The choreography is as it was, always. The new thing are the new sets and new costumes.
I'm going to turn to Toer now because we've moved on to the production here. Is it a challenge making, for instance, the interior of a house, but still leaving room for the dancers to do their steps?
I'm so terribly used to doing sets for ballet that if ever you have to do sets for an opera, for a play, it's like a treat because you can use the floor space also for decoration. But like I said, I'm completely used that ballet needs the floor, but it does need a lot of calculation and measuring because, for instance, we were talking about the tall staircase that Cinderella has to come down from. Well, a staircase of, I think, 11 steps takes up a lot of space.
Of course.
And you have to calculate it so that there's still space enough in front for the dancers.
Because it's a big cast, isn't it, in Cinderella? There's a lot of people on the stage.
It's an amazingly large production. We have had it for years and years also with my company in Amsterdam, the National Ballet of Netherlands. But I wasn't involved personally in that production, and I didn't realize how large the production is until I had to start working on it.
Christine, every little girl that wants to be a ballet dancer wants to dance in a fairy tale. Did you always want to design costumes for a fairy tale?
Oh goodness, I first saw this ballet when I was 12 years old, and I saw Bobby Helpman and Sir Fred in the production, so I was very fortunate, and I never forgot it, and it impressed me so much. I can't believe I'm here today, and I'm designing, well, I have designed it, the production, the costumes for the production.
Is it a particular challenge designing costumes which dancers can move in?
Yes, there are many considerations, particularly to do with the tutus and the width of the tutus and around the waist area. You cannot have any decoration around this area at all, otherwise the boys will cut their hands to ribbons. There have been many considerations with the Ugly Sisters, particularly as one of them has very large panniers. So as he has to pirouette a lot, it's a great challenge.
And do you have a favourite costume?
Oh, I think I've got about 3 actually, yes I do.
Which are they?
Well, the bossy ugly sister is number 1, I think, and the stars. Those, and well, I have another one, the tabard page as well. Yes, those 3 at the moment are my favourites.
Thank you all so much for joining me. The curtain is now about to rise on the second act, set in the ballroom of the palace, and at the centre of the stage is the Jester, who's one of Ashton's most interesting and ambiguous characters. He's part Harlequin, part Pierrot, and part Buttons, and he's danced tonight by the charismatic Spanish dancer Jose Martin. Soon the prince arrives, and shortly afterwards, Cinderella, in one of ballet's most famous and most terrifying entrances. Watch out for that heart-stopping moment as she descends the staircase into the ballroom. On point.